Hayes Fletcher didn't think twice before swiping right. It was a random Tuesday night, and he was sitting on the edge of his penthouse balcony overlooking the Los Angeles skyline, whiskey in one hand and boredom clawing at his chest. He wasn't drunk, just tired. Tired of the women who only saw his six-figure watches, not the man wearing them. Tired of networking events disguised as dates. Tired of being Hayes Fletcher, the millionaire tech investor, instead of just Hayes. His best friend dared him to try the dating app. Just be normal, he'd said. No last names, no photos with the Aston Martin, no yacht selfies, just let someone meet you. So he did. He used a picture of himself in a plain gray t-shirt, left out his job title, and put Hayes, likes dogs, hates olives. And then she showed up, Lennon Whitmore. Her profile was simple. Lover of thunderstorms, works too much. Laughs loudly at bad jokes. He didn't even think. He swiped right, and when she matched with him, his heart actually skipped. He didn't know then that she'd be the one to match his heart. They met 3 days later at a beachside coffee shop in Santa Monica. No makeup, hair up in a messy ponytail, a chipped blue mug in her hand. She didn't try to impress him. She was just Lennon, and she was late. "I'm so sorry," she said when she finally rushed in, breathless, cheeks pink. "There was a dog in the parking lot. He had no collar. I had to okay, long story. Hi, I'm Lennon." "Hi," Hayes said, stunned by her energy. "I'm Hayes, and I like dogs," she grinned. Then this might work. They sat for hours, no scripts, no games. She asked about his favorite movie, not what car he drove. She talked about her job as a children's book illustrator and how she sometimes forgot to eat when she was deep in a story. He told her he worked in tech. Left it at that. He didn't lie. He just didn't correct her when she assumed he was a web developer. "I bet you have a million screens open all day," she joked. "Something like that," he said with a small laugh, sipping his coffee. When she got up to leave, she hesitated. This felt easy. "It did," Hayes agreed, standing with her. "Can I see you again?" She nodded. "Yeah, you can." They met again. And again. A week later, he took her to a tiny rooftop bar in Silver Lake with fairy lights and soft jazz where no one recognized him. She didn't dress up. She wore jeans and a leather jacket and told him she didn't care much for wine, but she'd try anything once. And when he laughed at one of her terrible jokes, she lit up like the moon had reached down and kissed her cheek. He couldn't stop watching her. He didn't tell her about the money. Or the penthouse. Or the fact that his last company sold for $80 million. He didn't want to ruin whatever this was. But he started sending his driver to pick her up without explaining how he knew a guy. He bought out a tiny theater one night just so she could see her favorite childhood movie on the big screen again. She cried when the credits rolled and whispered, "That was the kindest thing anyone's ever done for me," and he just looked at her like he was the lucky one. Until the night she pushed her plate away during dinner and said, "Can I ask you something?" They were at a quiet Italian restaurant tucked in the hills, candlelight flickering between them. "Yeah," he said, heart thudding. "Are you really just a web developer?" He froze. She raised an eyebrow. "You have a driver, Hayes. You don't flinch when the check comes, and that theater night, no normal guy pulls that off." He sighed and leaned back in his chair. "Okay, you caught me." She crossed her arms. "So what do you actually do?" He looked into her eyes. "I co-founded a tech company when I was 24, sold it at 30. Now I invest in startups. I've been on Forbes twice, and yes, I have a penthouse, and a driver, and a ridiculous car I never drive." She blinked. "So you're a millionaire." "I didn't lead with it because that's all people ever care about. I just wanted someone who saw me, not the bank account." Lennon was quiet for a long beat, then finally said, "You could have told me." "I was scared," he admitted. "You're the first person I've met in years who made me forget about all that, who made me feel like me, just Hayes." She leaned forward, her voice softer. "I'm not mad, I just don't want secrets between us." "No more secrets," he said, his hand reaching for hers. "I promise." She looked down at their hands, then back at him. "Okay," he exhaled in relief. "But you're taking me to your penthouse next time," she added, teasing. He laughed. "Deal." And from that moment on, everything shifted. He started showing her his world. He flew her to Napa for a wine tasting first class, of course. She wore a sundress, and he couldn't stop staring at her across the vineyard, wind in her hair, laughing as she spit out the wine she hated. He bought her sketchbooks in every size and color, left them in her apartment like surprises. She painted him once, in watercolor. Sitting on her couch, barefoot, reading, he framed it. And when he was stressed from a deal gone wrong, she showed up at his office with tacos and a handmade card that said, "You're still my favorite millionaire." He kissed her like he couldn't breathe without her, but not everything was perfect, not yet. Because Lennon was starting to fall and fall hard, and that terrified her. She'd been hurt before, by a man who promised forever but ran when things got real. She didn't know if she could survive another heartbreak and haze. He'd never let anyone that close. But they were both about to realize that some risks are worth everything, especially when it's your heart on the line. Lennon hadn't expected to end up dancing barefoot in the middle of an empty ballroom. But then again, nothing about Hayes had been what she expected. The night had started with an invitation handwritten, sealed with wax, delivered in person by a sharply dressed man named Elias who addressed her as Miss Whitmore and held the door of the town car like she was royalty. The card inside the envelope had only 2 words, "Dress comfortably." When they pulled up to the historic Montclair Hotel, she'd turned to Elias with wide eyes. "We're going inside," he'd nodded once. "He's waiting for you," and Hayes was. Standing in the middle of the grand lobby, wearing jeans and a button-down shirt rolled up at the sleeves, like he hadn't just booked out the most exclusive venue in the city for whatever this was. "You said you always wanted to learn ballroom," he said as she stepped out of the elevator and walked toward him, heart thudding. "I told you that once." "I was listening." She stared up at the ornate chandelier above. "Is this real?" His hand slid into hers. "Only if you dance with me." So she did. He'd hired a violinist, just one who stood off to the side and played as their feet moved slowly over the polished floor. Lennon had never danced like that before, not even at prom. Every spin, every turn was guided by his hand on her waist, his eyes locked on hers like she was the only thing that existed. She didn't realize she was crying until he brushed a thumb across her cheek. "Too much?" he asked, almost whispering. She shook her head. "It's the kind of too much I never thought I'd get." Later, they sat on the edge of the fountain outside, sharing a paper bag of warm pretzels he'd apparently stashed in the car ahead of time. She leaned her head on his shoulder, and he rested his cheek against her hair. "Do you ever get tired of pretending everything's fine when it's not?" she asked quietly, his arm tightened around her. "Every day," she looked up at him. "Tell me something you've never told anyone." He was silent for a moment, then said, "I used to stutter until I was 13. I couldn't even say my own name without freezing." She blinked. "Hayes. My mom used to sit with me after school every day and make me read out loud. For hours, I hated it, but she wouldn't stop, and one day it just got better." Lennon reached for his hand. "She sounds incredible." "She was," he said, voice low. "She died right before I sold the company." "I'm sorry." He gave a small nod. "She would have liked you." They didn't speak for a while after that, just listened to the soft rush of water and the distant sounds of the city. The next morning, Lennon woke up to a knock on her apartment door. When she opened it, there was no one there, just a large white box tied with navy ribbon. Inside was a sketchbook with thick, textured pages and a note tucked into the cover. "Draw something that scares you." She stared at it for a long time before closing the door and sitting cross-legged on her rug, pencil in hand. She didn't know what to draw at first, but her hand moved anyway. She drew a heart fractured down the middle, hands reaching toward it from opposite sides. That night she called him. "I drew it," she said the second he answered. He didn't ask what it was. "Can I see it?" "Only if you come over." 20 minutes later, he was at her door, hair damp from a shower, carrying 2 cartons of Thai food. She handed him the sketchbook without a word. He studied it for a long moment. Then looked up. "Is this about us?" "It's about me," she replied, "and maybe a little about you. Do you think I'll break your heart?" "I think I've never let anyone close enough to try." He set the book down gently. "Then let me be the first." They ate on the floor, legs tangled together, her cat wedged between them like a suspicious chaperone. Between bites, she asked, "Were you always this grand?" He laughed quietly. "Honestly, no. I used to think a successful date was one where I didn't talk too much or spill anything on myself." She smiled. "And now I know a successful date is one where you look at me like that." "Like what?" "Like you're trying not to fall and failing badly." She didn't deny it. But the next week, everything shifted. It started with a phone call. Lennon had just finished a meeting with her publisher when her sister called, frantic. "It's Dad. He collapsed at work." She was already running before she hung up. Hayes was the first person she thought of, but she didn't call him, didn't want to drag him into the chaos. Her father had never exactly embraced her choices, least of all her decision to pursue art full-time. They hadn't spoken much in the last year. But when she walked into the hospital room and saw him lying there, pale and still, something cracked inside her. She stayed the night in the uncomfortable plastic chair next to his bed, sketching quietly just to keep her hands busy, her mind from spiraling. When the sun rose, she stepped out to get coffee and found Hayes leaning against the wall outside the ICU, eyes tired, holding 2 cups. "You didn't call," he said. "I didn't want to bother you. You're never a bother." She took the cup without a word and sat next to him on the bench. "He's stable," she finally said. "They think it was a mild heart attack." Hayes reached over and took her hand. "You don't have to do this alone. I've always done it alone." "Well," he said, "you don't have to anymore." She looked at him, then really looked. And for the first time, let herself believe it might be true. But later that night, when she got home, her phone buzzed with a message from her publisher. There'd been a miscommunication. A major client was unhappy. Her next release was being pushed indefinitely. She stared at the message, heart sinking. Everything was unraveling. Her father, her career. And here she was, falling for a man who lived in a world so far removed from hers it might as well be another planet. She didn't call Hayes, didn't answer when he tried. She just curled up in bed, sketchbook pressed to her chest, and wondered when things had gotten so hard to hold. Hayes didn't sleep. He sat in the backseat of his car outside Lennon's apartment for over an hour, watching the streetlights flicker against the rain-slicked pavement. Her lights were off, no movement behind the windows. He'd knocked once, waited, knocked again, nothing. Elias glanced at him in the rearview mirror. "Sir, give her a little more time." He wasn't used to this being shut out. In business, when something slipped, he fixed it, acquired it. Outbid it, but this wasn't a deal to be closed. This was Lennon. And she'd vanished behind silence. The next morning, he walked into his office and ignored the stack of contracts waiting on his desk. Instead, he reached for the small envelope tucked in his leather briefcase, the one she'd drawn on the back of a napkin weeks ago. A tiny sketch of a fox curled in a teacup. Her idea for a children's book, she'd said. She'd looked so hopeful when she showed it to him. He turned it between his fingers, then stood. "Cancel my afternoon," he told his assistant as he strode past her desk. Everything. Hayes didn't go to her apartment. He knew she wouldn't answer. Instead, he went to the one place he thought she couldn't resist. The art co-op downtown smelled like turpentine and hope. He stepped inside the old converted warehouse and was hit by the scent of drying paint and freshly sanded wood. The manager, a wiry woman with silver rings on every finger, raised an eyebrow when she saw him. "I'm looking for Lennon Whitmore. She hasn't been in all week." "Do you have her locker number?" The woman hesitated, then nodded toward a row of metal lockers near the back. Hayes found the one with her name taped across the front in faded purple marker. He knelt down and slid a small envelope beneath the door. Inside was the fox sketch and a note. "I believe in this, and I believe in you." He left without waiting for a response. That night he returned to his penthouse. It felt larger than usual. Empty in a way that had nothing to do with space. He poured a glass of bourbon, then didn't drink it. Instead, he opened the drawer of his side table and pulled out the framed watercolor she'd painted of him weeks ago. He hadn't moved it since she gave it to him. He set it on the piano, then sat down on the bench. He hadn't played in years. But his fingers found the keys anyway. The notes were clumsy, uneven, but they filled the silence. 2 days passed, then 3, until finally, on the 4th, a knock at his door broke the stillness. He opened it without checking the camera. Lennon stood there, hair damp from the fog, her coat too thin for the evening chill. She didn't say anything at first, just looked at him like she wasn't sure if she should be there. "I got your note," she said at last. He stepped aside. "You came." "I wasn't going to, but then I realized I didn't want to keep running from the one person who saw me when everything else was falling apart." He closed the door behind her. She stayed near the entrance, fingers curled around her coat buttons. "My dad's home. He's recovering. But he's still bitter. I tried to talk to him, and he told me maybe if I'd picked a real job I could have helped more." Hayes didn't interrupt. "I almost believed him," she continued. "Then I found your note." He moved toward her. "I didn't know how else to reach you." She looked up. "You reached me, and I'm sorry I disappeared. I didn't know how to let someone help me without feeling like I owed them something." He stepped closer. "You don't owe me anything." Tears rimmed her eyes, but she didn't blink them away. "I want to show you something." She pulled a folded paper from her coat pocket and handed it to him. It was a page from her sketchbook, rushed and raw. A little girl standing in front of a towering cityscape, holding a paper fox in one hand and a paintbrush in the other. Her eyes were wide, brave. "I drew her the night I got your note," Lennon said. "She's scared, but she's choosing to stay anyway." Hayes ran a thumb gently over the edge of the paper. "She's beautiful, she's me, or who I want to be." He met her eyes. "You already are," she exhaled shakily. "I want to try again." "Really try?" His jaw tightened as he fought the emotion rising in his chest. "Then come with me." "Where?" He didn't answer, just took her hand and led her onto the balcony. The air was cool, the city a glittering net of gold and silver beneath them. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small black box. "No," she said quickly. "Wait, it's not what you think," he said, smiling for the first time in days. He opened the box to reveal a key. Silver, simple, tied with a ribbon. "I had this made the day after our first date." "I didn't know why, I just did." She stared at it, then at him. "I'm not asking you to move in," he said. "Not yet. I'm asking you to trust me, to keep choosing me, even when it's hard, especially then." Lennon reached for the key like it might disappear if she didn't grab it fast enough. Her fingers closed around it and she pressed it to her chest. "I choose you," she whispered. "Even when I'm scared." He pulled her into him, arms wrapping around her like they belonged there. She fit against him like a final puzzle piece, not perfect, but whole. "I've got you," he said, voice low in her ear. "And I'm not going anywhere," she laughed softly. "Good, because I'm tired of running." He kissed her then, deep and full of all the words they hadn't said, the kind of kiss that rewrites endings and begins again. Tomorrow would bring more complications. Her career, his business, the weight of 2 lives colliding, but tonight, beneath the cold sky and the hum of the city, they were just Hayes and Lennon. And for the first time, that was enough. The gallery smelled like fresh paint and possibility. Lennon stood in the center of the space, her palms pressed flat against her jeans to keep from fidgeting. The walls were hung with framed illustrations, her illustrations, each one a quiet piece of her heart. The little girl with the paper fox. The boy with the broken umbrella. The old woman painting stars on her ceiling, all of them born in moments when she'd felt most fragile, most alive. A soft murmur of conversation floated around her as guests filtered in. People from her publisher, fellow artists, even a few high school students from a nearby art program. Hayes hadn't told her how many people he'd invited. He just said, "Let me take care of it," then kissed her forehead and disappeared into a flurry of calls she wasn't allowed to overhear. Now she understood why. "Miss Whitmore," said a voice behind her. "Your work is remarkable." She turned to find a man in a tailored navy suit, hair streaked with silver, eyes sharp and assessing. He extended a hand. "I'm Charles Denham. I run Evergreen Publishing. She shook his hand, pulse rising. Thank you, that's very kind. He gestured toward a piece on the far wall, a fox curled around a sleeping child, stars tucked beneath its tail. I haven't seen whimsy handled with such emotional intelligence in a long time, he said. There's a quiet urgency in your lines. Like you're saying something without yelling it, she blinked. That's exactly what I try to do, he nodded once. We should talk. As he stepped away, her breath caught. She turned and there was Hayes, standing near the entrance in a dark jacket, hands in his pockets, eyes trained on her like he'd known exactly when to appear. You sent him, she said as she reached him. I may have mentioned your name in a few emails, he replied, his voice casual but his gaze anything but. You didn't have to, I wanted to. He looked around at the crowd. They're here for you, Lennon. You don't need my name to shine. You've already lit the place up. She rested her forehead against his chest for a moment. I don't know how to say thank you. Don't, he murmured. Just keep drawing. Later that night, they returned to his penthouse. The city blinked beneath them, but inside it was quiet. He poured her a glass of champagne and handed it to her without a word. What's this for? She asked. Look inside the flute. She tilted the glass. Nestled against the curved crystal was a tiny key charm, delicate and gold, looped onto a thin chain. It's not a real key, he said. But I figured you should still have one that fits you. She held it in her palm. You're impossible. I'm persistent, he corrected. There's a difference. She leaned into the couch, watching him as he sat beside her, one arm draped across the backrest. The fire in the hearth crackled softly. I used to think I didn't need anyone, she said. That if I just kept my head down and worked, eventually things would click into place. That love was a distraction. And now I think love might be the thing that makes all the other pieces worth finding. He reached into the side table drawer and pulled out a worn leather notebook. I found this a few days ago, buried under a stack of old contracts. She arched a brow. What is it? The first list I ever made, when I was 22 and stupidly ambitious. All the things I wanted by 35, own a company, check, buy back my childhood home, check, fall in love. He trailed off and glanced at her. I left that one blank. Didn't think it was realistic. She took the notebook gently, flipping through a few pages. You wrote all of this before you even made your first million? Back then, I thought money would fix everything, that if I had enough, I'd feel safe. Like I'd finally earned peace. And now, he looked at her, voice quieter, now I know peace isn't something you buy, it's someone you trust when everything else is uncertain. She didn't speak, just leaned forward and kissed him, soft and slow. The kind of kiss that didn't need to prove anything. When she pulled back, she said, I want to do something reckless, he blinked. Like what? Come away with me, just for a few days, no press, no drivers, just us, somewhere quiet, he grinned. You're serious. I want to see who we are when we're not surrounded by glass and skyline. He stood, already pulling out his phone. Mountains, ocean. Surprise me. 2 days later, they were standing on the edge of a lake in Northern California, the air crisp with pine and wood smoke. Lennon wore an oversized sweater, her sketchbook under one arm. Hayes had traded his usual sleek suits for hiking boots and a worn flannel. They stayed in a secluded cabin with creaky wood floors and a fireplace that needed coaxing. There was no cell service, no cameras, no one to impress. Just mornings with pancakes and late nights with shared memories. One evening, as they watched the sun sink behind the trees, Lennon turned to him. Do you think this is it? He glanced over. What, this, us, the last beginning? He took her hand. I hope so. They stayed out long after the sky turned violet, her head on his shoulder, the world falling into quiet around them. When they returned to the city, everything felt different, not louder, just clearer. Lennon's book was officially greenlit. Hayes took on a mentorship program, offering grants to young entrepreneurs without access to traditional funding. And one late afternoon, as they walked through a neighborhood market, she spotted a small booth selling handmade ceramics. She picked up a mug shaped like a fox curled in sleep. Hayes paid for it before she could argue. You spoil me, she said. No, he said, wrapping his arm around her waist. I see you. There's a difference. 6 months later, he took her back to the beachside cafe where they first met. She wore the same ponytail. He wore the same hopeful look. Except this time, he stood in the center of the cafe, dropped to one knee, and opened a small velvet box. I signed up for a dating app thinking I'd kill time, he said. I didn't know I'd find the person who'd match every part of me, including the ones I didn't know were missing. She didn't cry. She laughed, then said yes so quickly she nearly knocked him over. And as they walked back to the car, her hand in his, the ring catching the last of the sun, Lennon whispered, "You know, I think I've changed my mind." About what? Maybe love isn't a distraction at all. Maybe it's the reason. Hayes kissed her temple. I already knew that, he said. And this time they didn't run, they stayed, together. Hayes adjusted the cuff of his shirt, glancing at the champagne flute someone had shoved into his hand. He barely noticed the orchestra warming up across the ballroom or the glittering ceiling above. The only thing he saw was Lennon, standing near the terrace doors in a midnight blue gown that moved like water every time she shifted her weight. Her hair was pinned in soft waves, a silver pin tucked behind one ear. She was talking to a woman from her publishing house, nodding politely, but her eyes kept flicking toward him. When she finally broke away and made her way across the room, Hayes didn't wait. He met her halfway. "You okay?" she asked, brushing a bit of lint from his lapel. He leaned in so only she could hear him. "I've been trapped in 4 different conversations about mergers I didn't initiate and companies I don't care to acquire," she grinned. "Poor Millionaire. Rescue me." She took his hand and led him toward the terrace doors. The cold air hit them in a rush, but he didn't care. Neither did she. They leaned on the marble railing, the city spread out below like a carpet of stars. "I got the first proof today," she said, exhaling a shaky breath. "The book looks real, like I could touch it and it wouldn't disappear." He turned toward her. "You made it real." "I didn't know if I could. You did. And the next one will be even better." She looked down at the gold band on her left hand, twisting it slowly. "Do you think we'll ever stop feeling like we're holding our breath?" He reached over, covering her hand with his. "Maybe not. But I like the way it feels next to you." They stood in silence for a while, watching the lights flicker across the skyline. Then she reached into her clutch and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I wasn't going to show you this yet." She handed it to him. "But I changed my mind." He unfolded the paper. It was a sketch rough, unfinished. A little boy with Hayes's jawline sitting cross-legged in a garden, a fox curled around his feet. In his lap was an open book, and next to him, a woman with Lennon's eyes leaned in, laughing, his throat tightened. "You drew this." It came out before I could stop it. He didn't speak for a moment, then he looked up. "Are you saying what I think you're saying? I don't know for sure yet, but I have a feeling, and if I'm right." She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "I wanted you to see it the way I do, before everything changes." His voice was hoarse. "You're not alone in this, I know." He folded the drawing carefully and tucked it into his inside jacket pocket. "We'll figure it out, you and me." She rested her head against his shoulder. "I think I'm ready." "For what?" "To stop waiting for the other shoe to drop, to stop measuring happiness by how long it lasts." Hayes turned and cupped her cheek. "Then let's stop counting, let's just live it." Inside, the orchestra swelled. Someone clinked a glass, speeches were starting. Awards would follow, but out there on the terrace it was just them. 3 months later, Lennon stood barefoot in their kitchen, humming as she flipped pancakes. The smell of vanilla and butter drifted through the air. Hayes emerged from their bedroom, hair tousled, wearing a T-shirt she'd stolen from him weeks ago and returned only under threat of retaliation. He wrapped his arms around her from behind. "What time is your meeting?" "Noon. They're sending a car." She tilted her head back to kiss his cheek. "You, free until 2, thought I'd take you to lunch after." She flipped the last pancake and turned off the stove. "You planning to show up like that?" "I plan to be thoroughly distracting." She laughed and handed him a plate. "Mission accomplished." He set the plate down and reached for her hand. "Come with me for a second." "Where?" just upstairs. She followed him to the small room they'd converted into a studio. The walls were lined with shelves of art supplies, and the far side was all windows, looking out over the city. At the center of the room was a wooden cradle. She stopped in the doorway. Hayes rubbed the back of his neck. "I know it's a little early and we don't even know for sure yet, but I thought, if it is true, then maybe this could be the beginning of that space, for them, for us." She walked over and traced a hand along the edge of the cradle. "Where did you find this?" "I didn't." "I built it." Her head snapped up. "You built this." "I needed something to do with my hands, and I wanted it to be from me, not a store, not a catalog, just something real." She blinked quickly, then turned toward him. "If it's a girl, I want to name her after your mom." He stepped closer. "You sure? She's the reason you speak the way you do, the reason you are who you are. I'd be lucky if our daughter had even half of that strength." Hayes pulled her into him, pressing his lips to her temple. "You're going to be such a good mother, and you're already more than enough." That evening they curled up on the couch together, the city quiet beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. Lennon's sketchbook rested on her lap, Hayes's arm around her shoulders, a blanket tangled across their feet. As the sun dipped below the skyline, she turned the page and began to draw again. Not for work, not for deadlines, just for them. This time it was their hands, hers smaller, his larger, intertwined over a heartbeat neither of them could hear yet, but both believed in. Because they weren't waiting anymore, they were living it. Side by side, and for the first time in both their lives, that was everything.